And our top story, stagflation nation. More news that we are suffering inflation at the same time that our economy is coasting downhill. Retail sales numbers came in far less than expected. We were expecting a rise in month-to-month figures. Instead, they were down 0.3%. And the Fed's New York manufacturing number was even worse. We were expecting a 3% increase. Well, instead, as you can see, it was down 1.2%. And of course, no one needs to be reminded about the horrible inflation figures, except perhaps the president. Now, President Biden is in a bizarre state of denial about both the slowing economy and inflation. Here he is yesterday making a comment about inflation that needs some fact checking. Listen.
Under my plan for the economy, we made extraordinary progress. And we put America in a position to tackle a worldwide problem that's worse everywhere but here, inflation.
Well, in point of fact, here is the reality that Biden's just trying to sweep under the rug. Inflation, as you can see in the U.S., is higher than all the major European economies, despite what the president said. The reality of inflation and a slowing economy is not lost on average Americans who are having a hell of a time right now just making ends meet. And small businesses in America are overwhelmed by inflation, a slew of new regulations, and the threat of higher taxes. Now, the Fed appears to be sending at least some kind of a message with a 75 basis point rate hike, but with the president in a state of denial, we really have to gird our loins for a tough ride ahead, particularly since he remains determined to make matters worse with new regulations, new taxes, and price controls on domestic energy production as part of his exceptional transition to a green new world. For more, we bring in former OMB director and president of Center for Renewing America, Russ Vought, and Bulltech Capital Markets chief market strategist, Kathryn, Rooney, Vera. Great to see you both. Thanks for being here. Russ, I want to come to you. No matter what the Fed does, can we get out of stagflation with a president who's in denial of reality?
I don't see how. I mean, this administration is at war with the American economy, with their energy policy, with their regulatory policy. Today, if they were given an opportunity, if they were given Joe Manchin's vote, they would pass trillions of dollars of increased spending. They wouldn't think twice about it. And this is something you've been very dogged about, is articulating the fact that they have no change. There's been no pivot in this administration. All they've done is blame the Fed or say that this is the Fed's problem to solve. Thankfully, the Feds began to do that today. But I don't think when you have an administration that this is out of touch, particularly in the energy front, that we're ever going to be able to truly get and have that kind of soft landing that the Fed's trying to accomplish.
Well, the Fed did make a significant move today, Kathryn, but they have a credibility problem, because here's what Powell was saying just a month ago. Roll tape.
So 75 basis point in an increase is not something the committee is actively considering. What we are doing is we raised 50 basis points today.
Now, I know a lot can change in a month, but that's what he said just 1 month ago. So first talk about the credibility problem that the Fed has, and then talk about what changed, what has changed in that month.
The crazy thing, David, is that the Fed, in increasing 75 basis points, is trying to claw back some inflation-fighting credibility, because they've really lost it. I'll add to what you said. A year ago, the Fed was saying the labor market still needed support. There is no wage price spiral, and that inflation was temporary in nature. And they were relentless in their assertion that inflation was temporary. We knew then, and we know now, that it in fact is not. It's not Putin's fault. It's certainly endemic in nature. And unfortunately, David, the only thing that I think is going to take inflation back down to reasonable, even Fed target levels, which, by the way, is 2%, is unfortunately economic contraction. And I think that's where we're going. The question is, how soon will it happen? And I think to answer that, David, we need to watch the labor market and see when and if that turns and rolls over.
Russ, Kathryn is a brilliant economist. She makes great sense, but I would argue with her on one point, and I'll give you a chance to get back into that, Kathryn. But first to Russ, I think you can solve inflation. You really can, by looking at the other side, not just the Fed side, not just the supplies, the demand side, but the supply side. Increase supplies, open up the production gates. give incentives to all the companies, including, of course, energy companies, to produce more and therefore bring prices down. Isn't that a solution if we're looking for one?
Yeah, that's what I would be trying to do if I was in the administration, in a Republican administration, is I'd be arguing for those very type of policies. Let's get this economy growing with a real energy policy that's not at war with energy producers and envisions the fact that we actually have people in this economy that use energy, and we don't want to make it so hard for them to be able to get off the ground and small businesses accordingly. So I think that's absolutely the case. And I think the Fed has more work to do, and I was glad that I agree that the notion that their main credibility problem is the fact that no one believes that Jay Powell is an inflation hawk, and this very, very timed sequence, no one really believes is going to be able to get it under control. Today was a step in the right direction. I think they've got a lot further to go.
Now, Kathryn, I asked you what changed between the time Powell said just a month ago that he wasn't going to raise 75 basis points and now. And of course, it's that Biden has done just about everything wrong. I mean, he's gone totally against the idea of producing more by threatening producers, not just energy producers, but, meat producers. I mean, you name it. He's pointing the finger at all the producers, and he's going in exactly the opposite direction. Now, Donald Trump, I talked to him about 2 or 3 months ago. He said he could turn things around pretty quickly on the inflation front by increasing, getting back to energy independence, opening the spigots, et cetera. But I'm just wondering, in 2 years, so much damage can happen. It's not going to be easy to turn this around, is it?
No, it's not. And you're talking about the supply side, which is energy and food prices. And certainly, if we were to reopen the pipelines, were we to take the handcuffs in terms of regulation off of the oil producers and make the U.S. energy independent and a force to be reckoned with, and not be vulnerable to foreign, really enemy states for our energy needs. I mean, the fact that we're knocking on the door of Venezuela when we could be importing from our friendly neighbor Canada in the north is just atrocious to me. But I think that's a supply side. So even if you strip out oil and gas prices and food prices, David, core PCE, which is the metric the Fed most looks at, is still really, really high. It's above 6%, and the target is 2%. So the fact that the Fed kept juicing the labor market for such a long period of time, I think really puts us in a position where salaries and pressures in the demand front are really the hard thing to really bring down without economic contraction. So inflation is here to stay. I think it's sticky and structural in nature. And I think you see that in inflation expectations. So the Fed has really put its own self in a very difficult corner. The federal government, I'll add, has also contributed to this inflationary spiral with double-digit fiscal deficits, trillion upon trillion dollars of stimuli that was meant to target COVID, even when it was happening.
Oh, and it went
this is
so
never
far beyond that. Absolutely. It went absolutely beyond that. The first Biden, the Rescue America plan was more about establishing democratic principles of policies. But Russ, that we used to have something, I used to cover Latin America, and Latin America had a lot of enterprise zones. Remember those? The maquiladoras, they call them in Mexico, but places where you would have no taxes and no regulations. I think what we're going to need after 2 more years of this in America is one big enterprise zone. We're going to have a massive, we're going to have to turn this whole country into an enterprise zone to get it moving again, no?
No, we are, and that's what is vitally needed. And regulations don't just get cut overnight. It takes a long time to cut regulations and to reverse the damage of this administration. And so, we got to get at that work as soon as we possibly can. And hopefully the American people send the cavalry to be able to change the political makeup in such a way that we can get this administration out of office so that we can have the stranglehold on the economy over with and we can begin growing again.
By the way, is the Center for Renewing America coming up with blueprints, specific blueprints that the next administration, whether they're Democrat or Republican, can immediately put in place?
We are. In fact, we're working on a budget to be able to get a handle on our fiscal house in order, to be able to extend the tax cuts. We're working with Larry on this, and these are the things that we think are necessary to give a Republican administration in a Republican Congress.
Yeah, it happened in 1980. I remember the Heritage Foundation had a blueprint for what the new administration, the Reagan administration, could do. That blueprint was put into effect, and we turned things around. Of course, we went through an awful recession because they delayed the tax cuts. But once those tax cuts kicked in, so did America, and we could do it again. Russ, Kathryn, wonderful to see you both. Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it.